Welcome to the Craftsman Online Podcast. This is a weekly program focused on the relevant topics in Freemasonry and the various aspects of the craft. Any opinions, thoughts, or viewpoints shared during this program are that of the individual and do not reflect the official position of any Grand Lodge, appendant, or concordant body from which that member may hail. I'm your host, Brother Michael Arce, Editor-in-Chief of CraftsmanOnline.com, and I'm really proud to bring him back on our podcast, Worshipful Brother Darin Lahners. Welcome back, Darin.
Thanks for having me, Michael. I appreciate you inviting me on.
He joined us in our first season, and I also want to mention this as well, from one editor-in-chief to another. He's also an editor-in-chief of the Midnight Freemasons, which is another great Masonic blog and publication that if you're seeking that additional light in Freemasonry, I highly recommend you make it a part of your resource. I'm excited to have Darin here because we're picking up on our Cinema in the Craft series, and we're going to talk about Harry Potter and Freemasonry. And I told Darin before we got into this episode, I was going to make just one disclaimer that my general knowledge of Harry Potter really is just the first movie. I saw that. That's about it. I am not a Potterhead, and I understand that it's extremely popular now, especially with the millennial generation. So forgive me if I ask questions that make me seem like a muggle, but that's about all I know. So hopefully, Darin, you can shed a little bit more light on this, but the rumor is, and we'll just get to this right off the bat, was that J.K. Rowling was influenced by Freemasonry in her writing. In your examination of her work, do you find any Masonic connection?
J.K. has herself come out and said that while writing the last book, The Deathly Hallows, and in designing the symbol for the Deathly Hallows, that she was at the time, I think, thinking about her mother, and she was in her apartment, and the movie The Man Who Would Be King was on the television, and when she saw the apron worn by Sean Connery in the movie and saw the all-seeing eye, she made an immediate connection to the Deathly Hallows and thought that potentially there was some, I won't say outright, but subliminal influence on her particular design of that symbol in the book. So if not pure Masonic influence, and I don't know what she knows or doesn't know about Freemasonry, and obviously in England, Freemasonry has a different public persona than we have here. I think the craft here is more accepted than it is over there. I think it's much more secretive there. I think there's much more suspicion in England towards Freemasonry than there is here in the United States, even though there is still much of that depending on the person or their belief system. But I think as a general statement, I think that in England, in Europe, and in other parts of the world, that Freemasonry does kind of keep a more secretive persona because of this belief that it's an elitist society and only the creme de la creme are members. And
yeah, much different stereotype than what seems to be prevalent here in the States, where people think of Freemasons and they're like, when they meet men like us who are not in our 60s, 70s, or 80s, they ask, wow, aren't you too young to be a Freemason? It seems to be more associated, at least here, with something that came from your grandfather, which is also interesting because in England, and I know you've talked about this and written about it on the Midnight Freemasons blog, is that co-masonry does exist there. It also is a little bit more embraced and popular there. So there is the idea that she could have pursued some of this knowledge on her own. We won't know. Or she could have had a male figure in her life who was a Freemason that impressed some of the Masonic values on her. Again, we don't know that from that. What we can say is that what's fun about Freemasonry is when you get into studying our ritual and really researching the teachings and some of the deeper meanings, you do try to connect it with other either works of fiction or popular art or some of the classics that are out there to see and make it more relatable to others when you tell the Masonic story. So as we get started with this comparison here, I think it's fair. I basically said, hey, I'm not the biggest Harry Potter fan out there. Are you a casual fan? Would you call yourself a Potterhead? I honestly, I had to Google that. Where do you fall on the Harry Potter scale?
So I'm by no means a Potterhead. I have read the books through one time and seen the movies. Some of the movies I've seen probably more than once, but I won't say I've seen all the movies in the series more than once. But I know enough probably to be dangerous, but not enough to win a Harry Potter trivia contest. So,
Gotcha. Okay. So no drinking games.
well, if there were, I would probably lose or win, depending on how you look at it. So.
I think this is another book that we all try to relate to Freemasonry, and it was interesting to see a connection with Harry Potter. What role does the Joseph Campbell, the hero with 1,000 faces story play in the Harry Potter storyline?
If you look at the monomyth and you look at kind of the outline that Joseph Campbell set up, what you'll see is that matches up very much with Harry's journey, not only, and throughout the series, but also kind of in each book. And in the presentation, I think I want to say I break out kind of that particular, the monomyth, and discuss it in regards to what happens to Harry and the Sorcerer's Stone, or Philosopher's Stone. If you're, one of the English readers, they had to dumb it down for us Americans because nobody knows what the Philosopher's Stone is, or not everybody knows. Now, all the good Freemasons listening to the podcast should have an understanding what the Philosopher's Stone is, but the average American kid's not going to understand what the heck the Philosopher's Stone is, so they had to change the name. But so you see this journey where Harry basically essentially, comes from the ordinary world and takes this journey, which transforms him. And you can also apply that to all of the good myths, all the great stories, all the great movies. You see it in Star Wars, you can see it in the Matrix. And I've, also written about Masonic symbolism in the Matrix. So you can really kind of see this applied to these coming of age stories where you have a young, normally young man, and not to you also can be applied to young woman. You see it in the series with Katniss Everdeen, and it's Hunger Games. Thank you. Yeah. So you can see the same monomyth applied there, where you have a young person who basically, with the help of some allies and an older mentor or mentors, goes out into the world and faces, evil, and comes back triumphant and changed. So you see this story told over and over, and that's what I think led Joseph Campbell to realize, and breaking down all the great myths of history, that this outline kind of applies. And it also applies to Freemasonry. You can think of it as undergoing the monomyth is like the journey through your degrees. You start out in the world of the so-called profane, and then you end up a changed individual as you reach the sublime degree of Master Mason.
We see Harry as this cute, little young guy who's going off to wizard school, and that's immediately where some of the intersection starts with ritual and spiritualism, and then self-actualization. I do understand that those themes are very present and identified throughout the books and into the movies. But you had started with like that first part of becoming an entered apprentice, and I want to get to that a little bit there, where I think as Freemasons, we can understand when we have this idea of what we think Freemasonry is. And for those of us that get asked that question in our investigation, or just by visiting a lodge where, hey, what are you looking to get out of Freemasonry? Well, we don't really know, because we don't know what Freemasonry is completely about. We haven't experienced it yet. Harry Potter basically went through the same thing, where he didn't know what was on the other side of the door, so to speak, and he didn't even know how to get there. He needed help as well.
So one of the steps in the monomyth is like the call to adventure, essentially, where you receive this you receive this call to go on this journey, and I think I equate it in the presentation to, the candidate who's thinking about petitioning a lodge, and then maybe he meets with somebody who's he considers a mentor, who's a Freemason, and they kind of introduce them a little bit to what Freemasonry is about, and then they ultimately make the decision to petition. And what I think is really kind of neat about the monomyth and Freemasonry is that there's a step in the monomyth there where you are crossing the threshold into, I think it's called crossing the threshold to the special world or something like that. And ultimately in the monomyth, that's when the hero decides to go on the adventure. So that's where, Harry decides he's going to go and he learns from Hagrid about his, why he has the scar on his forehead, and about his parents, and why he's, been invited to go to Hogwarts, and he boards this train, which whisks him off to this magical world. And, Luke Skywalker, when he joins Obi-Wan Kenobi, and they enlist Han and Chewie and board the Millennium Falcon and take off on this adventure. And for the candidate, it's when he is in the preparation room and he is blindfolded and knocks on that door 3 times and crosses through that doorway into the lodge room. So you see this not only this metaphysical but also this physical representation of the individual going on this journey.
I have to correct something I misspoke earlier. I saw the first movie, and I think I saw either the opening or bits and pieces of a later movie where ghosts were chasing Harry Potter. And because of, the time that had passed, he was no longer this cute little kid, but he was very still identifiable. But he was getting to that point where I guess he was being challenged, and he was close to becoming a quote unquote master. Obviously, the Harry Potter story has also continued outside with another storyline that has come from some of the other characters. But did you get the sense that Harry Potter, quote unquote, completed his degrees and was raised to the degree of a Master Mason through his storyline?
Yeah, you see, I think you see the idea, and this is also, a step on the monomyth. There's this step of basically resurrection where you have essentially you have the hero face this final daunting encounter with death, and he comes out triumphant. And especially in Harry Potter, what you see is that Harry Potter essentially has to physically die in order to gain the power to defeat Voldemort and vanquish him. Essentially, he has to destroy this part of Voldemort that's inside of him, and the only way of doing so is his death and his resurrection. So I think that absolutely by the end of the series, the book series, and also the movies that are based on the books, that Harry absolutely has become the equivalent of a master of his craft, if you will. And due to having to, much like, not to give too much away, but much like what happens in our journey.
Do we find our Patronus? Is that what you're trying to tell me? That's the thing, right? The deer, the stag.
Yeah, that's well, I some people do, some people don't. I guess it would depend on how I think they always, the thing that used to bother me, and although it's so true, and it really, I think because it's true, bothers me more, is you always there, at least around here in Illinois, there's always the one guy who at the third degree, when they're going around, congratulating the candidate, says to the candidate, you get out of Freemasonry what you put into it. And it bothered me for a very long time because I felt like it was essentially giving the guy an excuse to not go to meetings or not to. But on the other side of the coin, it's very true. If you have the passion for the study or pursuit of Freemasonry, it is rewarding, right? And you do get out of it what you put into it. But I also it took me a while to reach that level of understanding, because for the longest time it really, and I've written, I mean, you can go back and probably read some of the old articles in Midnight Freemasons where I've written about how much this really irritated me, that it was really kind of just in my mind giving that canon an excuse to go off and never be seen again.
Which is another movie that is not falling into the Harry Potter world, but it is a theme in some other films. So I was thinking of Harry Potter. One of my favorite scenes is when he goes to the wand store to purchase his wand. He had that and learned his spells and for protection and strength. Master Masons and honestly all Masons, they're armed with working tools and lessons as we strive to build our temple. How do you find these two worlds, and do you see them running parallel to each other?
So so one of the things I point out in the presentation is about kind of with the wands, how each kind of wand gets imbued with special abilities depending on the type of wood and the type of core. And like, for example, Harry's wand is made of holly and has a feather or a feather from a phoenix as its core. So what I found really interesting was that we have the sprig of acacia, which acacia is a type of wood and it holds a very special meaning for us, and that these wands, like Harry's wand, they have special properties and meanings for those that wield them. And what really is kind of interesting in researching it was that Manly P. Hall talks about how the phoenix is significant because the phoenix uses the sprigs of acacia for making its nest. That's the only wood that it uses to nest in. So, which is appropriate given, the symbology of the phoenix and the idea of the sprig of acacia having much the same meaning, that meaning of, that idea of the immortality and, the phoenix rising from its ashes to be born anew. So, yeah, absolutely. I think that there is that correlation.
That was one of the parts of your presentation I thought was really beautiful, how you were able to am amazed. You have this topic of Harry Potter, and then you get into the complex world of Manly P. Hall, and you even get into Albert Mackey's work and connection with some of the Masonic teachings and the esoteric thought, and bang, there's that symbolism there. Are there any other examples that you can think of from your presentation where you were able to take some of the simplicity maybe of J.K. Rowling's storytelling and go, this also can be pinpointed or connected here?
I really like the idea of the Philosopher's Stone and kind of the equating it really to the idea of all these alchemists being obsessed with possessing the Philosopher's Stone, and it being this type of substance that essentially is going to grant one immortality, and that there was many an alchemist, and they actually in the movie mention somebody as an alchemist who was a real alchemist, Nicholas Flamel, historically was an alchemist and was trying to create this stone, to create this elixir of life, to basically become immortal. and taking that idea of, this particular artificial stone that one is trying to create through alchemy, and then linking it to the idea of the imperfect and perfect ashlar. The idea that we are, as Freemasons, trying to transform ourselves from this imperfect form to this perfect form. And I really see that as being, this alchemical transformation that we are essentially trying to make ourselves into more perfect individuals so that we can be granted immortality. The immortality is not going to happen on this plane, but in our belief in the house not made with hands, so to speak. So
I also found it interesting in the Harry Potter world, they refer to those who are not into magic as muggles.
Right.
Which I think basically accounts for about 90% of people who don't read the books as well and don't understand the movie references. We're all muggles. And in Freemasonry, we have a term that we use for the outside world or non-Masons, as we call them the profane.
Right.
And I guess we really wouldn't be doing any justice as Freemasons and having this conversation if we didn't really breach the topic of quote-unquote secret societies. And really, are they secret? Is Harry Potter's world secret? Do you consider Freemasonry to be secret?
Really good question. So what I think is interesting is that in the world of the magical world, if you will, in Harry Potter, very much is kept secret from the world of the Muggles. Whereas in our reality, the quote unquote profane world at least knows about the existence of Freemasonry. Now, obviously, all of this quote unquote secrets are easily obtained with, a quick Google search. If you're really that interested in knowing the passwords and all of that stuff. The thing about both the Harry Potter novels and Freemasonry is the journey. You don't really understand, with Harry Potter, I don't think you could read or watch one of the later movies without having an understanding, at least of maybe the first, one or two, at least having an understanding of who Harry is and why he's special and what he's fighting in this darkness that he's fighting in the form of Voldemort and the Death Eaters. But there are, what's interesting about Harry Potter is that there are several, kind of secret societies that exist within that world as well. You have the Death Eaters that are, the followers of Voldemort, and then you have the Order of the Phoenix, which is, the resistance basically against Voldemort and fighting so that he doesn't conquer the magical world. And then, after conquering the magical world, easily conquering the Muggle world, if you will. So you kind of see this, you have this idea of this struggle that's going on, and the world's fate being in the balance, and 90% of the people basically really not having any idea of its happening in J.K. Rowling's universe, because you have this magical world and then you have the Muggle world, and the two can intersect, but you often see that that great lengths are taken so they don't. And as I recall then I don't remember which book, but Hermione essentially has to erase her existence from her Muggle parents, so that they're not captured or tortured by Voldemort. So you have these characters making these real difficult decisions to essentially choosing the magical world over the muggle world, and severing relationships with loved ones just in order to save those loved ones from a danger that they don't even know exists. So it's pretty heavy stuff. What surprises me in reading and seeing all the symbolism and seeing the struggle that's really going on is that and I think that's the appeal as well, because it works on so many levels. You can read it as an adult and have a different appreciation of it than as you might as a child. It's just really fascinating and fun and adventure. But these are some dark themes that she's really kind of espousing in these books and dealing with. So
in the first story, and she's doesn't really hold any punches back either. She gets right into the kind of the dark underbelly story of Harry Potter, which, in Freemasonry, for Masons, you don't really hear about it. I mean, you can definitely read books about the Haramic legend, but as a Master Mason, it's not really explained to you until you get to the third degree through our ritual, and then that teaching and that lesson is presented to you, where poor Harry is dealing with this story and is almost revered, and people also fear him at the same time. He's got this difficult life that he's got to lead, and there's this prophecy, I guess, for lack of a better term, of what is supposed to happen for him and his outcome, but yet he's still able to build these friends and these relationships around him. That's different in Masonry, where you build the friends and the relationships around you before you learn about the Haramic legend, and honestly, I think for a lot of brothers it enhances that. The other thought that I had as a takeaway on this was, again, for me, I told you I had seen the movie The Internship with Vince Vaughn and Owen Wilson, and there's a scene in this movie where they're playing older guys that are interning at Google, not that part, but when they actually have to do a Quidditch tournament, and I thought, Darin has a presentation on this. I'll always think of you when it comes across to Freemasonry. But
yeah, so
are you going to say the line about the broomstick?
Yeah, well, what I was going to say is that that what kind of was interesting is and I talk about the idea of the snitch basically being this almost looking like the Egyptian sun god symbol, the winged disc, and the reverence towards kind of the idea of it. Essentially, they're a bunch of they're 7 men or women on a Quidditch team. There's in order to make quorum in a lodge, you need 7 individuals, and just kind of some of that correspondence. And I think I even remark in the presentation, that some of the stuff I'm coming up with may be a stretch, but really, is it essentially, depending on your jurisdiction here in Illinois, we pride ourselves on our rod work. So, we have 2 individuals that are carrying rods and various symbols, circumambulating the lodge room and essentially riding their broomsticks, and they're carrying them. But, so you have these kind of comparisons that are, somewhat of a stretch, but maybe also not so much of a stretch. So
it's also the thought of one of the things we're told in the first degree is that we're going to have our faith of acceptance be challenged.
Yeah.
And I find it very close in that meaning to that. I might never really understand everything that goes into the Harry Potter world or the books or the movies. I might not get all that. But I understand how frustrating it is when you know that, just because as a Master Mason, when I try to share some of the knowledge that I get as a Master Mason with those close or near me and they show zero interest in it, I could totally get that.
There's with Harry Potter, there's a different language that, comes out of it. In what other world are you going to know what a Horcrux is, so you have these, you have this almost or a Muggle, or you have this vocabulary being, built up in this world. And it's, the same with a lot of other movie franchises. You almost have these terms without understanding of that source material. It's just going to, go over your head.
This has been the Craftsman Online Podcast. Don't go away yet. We're not done. I want to say thank you to Brother Darin for coming on our podcast. Thank you, Brother Darin.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me, Mike.
And if you're a fan of this discussion, Brother Darin, he's a man of many talents. He's also one of the co-hosts of the Meet, Act, and Part podcast. You'll see that in our show links as well. I invite you to give a listen and subscribe. With that said, a reminder that new episodes of the Craftsman Online podcast are available for download every Monday morning. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.